Welcome to the Launch Capsule. With your host, James DuBos. Buckle up because your launch capsule begins now.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey there, this is Jim DuBos, and thanks for checking out this episode of the Launch Capsule. So in today's episode, I'm going to focus on a document called a CIM, or a Confidential Information Memorandum. And it's really this detailed document used in the sale of your business that you're going to provide to prospective buyers under a non-disclosure agreement. Typically, the investment banker or M&A advisor firm will help you create this document. So in this episode, what I'm going to do is give you the 11 sections that I typically see in a CIM. Now, just as a perspective, I shared with you in a previous episode that when we went through the teaser process, which was to generate an indicator of interest from prospective buyers, we received over 65 responses. Then we generated non-disclosure agreements, which began the LOI process. And what we did here was we said we're going to provide you the CIM, and we're going to put a date range when we need any LOIs back from prospective buyers. That way it didn't run on forever and ever. We knew that we had a timeline that we could basically expect to receive LOIs back. And in that journey from 65 indicators of interest, we received actually over 20 LOIs that we were able to review and refine down. In another episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about how that LOI process went, how the documents came in, the variety of the, I'll say, buyer opportunities that were presented to us as a board. And so I think it'll be insightful for you. But like I said, we're going to focus now on the CIM itself and basically the 11 sections associated with the document itself. And so in the first section, I would refer to this as the executive summary. And it's really focusing on the overview of the business. We're going to highlight the finances of the business at a high level, total revenue, gross margin, those types of things. We're going to define a summary of the opportunity, put the reason for the sale, and then ultimately, what is the transaction goal? Is it a full sale, recap, growth partner, those types of things. In section 2 is where we get into the company overview. So you're going to lay out a detailed company history. You want to highlight your mission, your vision, your values. You want to focus on the org structure. What is the actual underlying corporate structure of the entity itself? Typically here is where we highlight the leadership in key personnel bios, because what you're doing here is communicating to a buyer that you have the personnel to transition an entity, particularly in the case if a founder is not going to remain going forward. What is the ownership structure itself in terms of the actual shares or units owned in the entity? Again, we'll focus on the legal structure a little bit, LLC, C Corp, etc. And then any locations and facilities that are used in the operation of the company itself are important in this section. And then in section 3, we're going to focus on the products and services that make up the revenue mix. So we're going to describe the core products and services that you offer, the revenue mix by product and service, the pricing model and margins associated with those products and services. I like to talk a little bit about product life cycle and development roadmaps here, especially if you have intellectual property or things that are in constant research and development. Competitive advantages, if you have IP, patents, trademarks, maybe it's a differentiated service methodology that you use. This is going to get highlighted in this products and services section. And then in section 4, we're talking about the customers and the market itself. So you want to give a customer base overview, You want to indicate your top customers with a percentage of revenue. Uh, Sometimes you can anonymize it, but I don't generally think it's necessary to do that. What I like to do is, especially if you have a top 20 or 25 customers and you can show a repetition, particularly over a course of years, of those same customers over and over and over again. They might move around a little bit based upon the total revenue expended with the company. It's a great indicator of strong customer loyalty to the business itself. Certainly, customer retention and churn is a highlight that needs to go here. What is the overall industry trend and the market size, right? The market's, the market TAM, the total addressable market that you're operating within. What's the competitive landscape in those markets that you're operating? How do you differentiate? You'll call it the unique value proposition, but what's the key differentiators for you versus your competition? And then lastly, in this section, you're going to indicate a sales and marketing strategy, that go to market that you're executing against, and what differentiates you again versus your competition. In section 5, we want to focus on operations. So there'll be things like operational workflows and processes that you focus on. Who are your supply chain and key vendors? Highlighting those relationships, length of term, maybe credit lines associated, and so forth. Technology, systems, and tools. This is where you focus on your tech stack and the capacity, if you will, of the tech stack to support the growth that you project. And certainly that's going to be important for the buyer. If there's any inventory management and control that you need to have in place, if that's part of your business, if there's quality control systems that are in place that are part of the business, you need to highlight those here. And then overall capacity utilization and scalability. Here, what we're highlighting is the ability for the company to grow and scale. So it's just representing to the buyer that you have those capabilities inside the four walls of the company, whether that be in tech stack, personnel, operational processes, those types of things. In section 6, now we're digging into the people, right? Management and employees. And so here we would offer an org chart, traditional org chart. Who are the key team members and their roles? I like to represent the employee count total and the turnover percentage. If you have any open positions, that would go here as well. In this section, you also represent the compensation structures. So if you have bonuses, sales commissions, any incentives around comp, those are going to be the things that you're going to represent here. The overall employee benefits packages that are offered as a general employee is important here. And then I like to focus on culture, highlighting the what I'll call the ability for the employee to have a really strong relationship with the company. You're demonstrating that with low employee turnover, but you also demonstrate how you're focused on their personal and professional outcomes in this section of the document. And then lastly is if there are any dependencies on owners or key employees, you want to highlight those here. It's okay to have dependencies. It's okay to have key employees. What you're really communicating to the potential buyer is that these are people that you're going to need to make sure transition well through the transaction so that they have a high risk of success in the business itself. In section 7, we're going to focus on the financial information. So obviously it's 3 to 5 years of historical financials, income statement, balance sheets, cash flow, that type stuff. You're going to have a year-to-date and a trailing 12-month TTM result capability. You want to look at and represent your financial ratios and KPIs that you use in the business to manage, right? What are you managing against when we're talking about finances? Any adjusted EBITDA calculations and add backs need to be clearly represented, and hopefully those have been executed over a period of years so that it's not a last minute type of an adjustment. I like to highlight revenue and profit either by segment and or customer in this particular section again. I would also recommend the budgets and forecast in this section because a sophisticated buyer, particularly if this is a high 7-figure or an 8-figure type transaction, they're going to be looking for budgets and forecast. And so this is going to be, again, a component of the SIM itself. Section 8, we start to focus on growth, the organic and inorganic growth paths and opportunities that you've identified. Are there geographic or product service expansions that you can go execute? Cross-selling or upselling opportunities within the existing customer community itself? Are there operational improvements or tech upgrades that you need to do within the company itself? And are there some untapped market segments that are within reach of the current company structure, locations, and so forth? This is really important because a buyer, my dad would say, leave something for the future, right? Leave some meat on the bone. Well, here you're representing again the opportunity for that buyer to recoup their investment and sustain their investment as they move forward with the transaction itself. Number 9 is a section that I refer to as kind of legal and regulatory. And so here we would highlight, is there any pending or past litigation? Because that's going to be part of the due diligence process, so you might as well just get that out of the way. You would have any intellectual property details, specific assignments, IP assignments and so forth from the U.S. Trade and Patent Office. Regulatory compliance things that within the industry that you operate in, what are those compliance things that you operate and maintain every day to continue to execute your business? Are there key licenses and permits that you have to have in order to execute? And are there material contracts, leases, vendor agreements, those types of things? This is the area for those types of items. In section 10 is what I'll just call it a high-level deal structure and process. So here you're indicating a preferred deal structure, asset versus stock, timeline and milestones that you're shooting for, some next steps and contact information, and then finally kind of that process for in timeline for what I would call the letters of intent at that point. What are you interested in trying to execute against? If you don't do a timeline, what happens is it just feels like you're on this never-ending, wheel that just doesn't stop. And so I highly, highly recommend that you put a date range and a timeline on this process. Lastly, in 11 would just be any appendices that weren't in the upper level structure. So maybe it's full financial statements, maybe you have a more detailed org chart, a sample customer service agreement or contract. You could list equipment or assets in the appendices if it's substantial. I like to offer facility photos or virtual tours here because I think it's nice for them to actually see, the place where people work and operate day in, day out. If there's any, I'll call supporting documents, so patents, certificates, leases, things that would be material for them to review, go ahead and get it out of the way because at some point it's going to come back anyway, so you might as well just give it to them in the SIM. So at a high level, these are the 11 areas, I'll call it, that a SIM is going to contain. So in the last transaction, the SIM that we created was over 70 pages. Okay, so this is a large document, and it's going to take a lot of effort on management and on your key employee team to produce the documentation necessary for your M&A advisory team to be able to create this document. It's going to be a visually appealing document, so it needs to represent you. We used our colors, our branding, our look and feel of our company because that's who we were. All right, that was part of who we were. We also had a very strong employee-centric culture, and so when we built the document, we wanted it to have pictures of people in the document because we felt like that the company was the composite of all of the employees that were within it, right? That's really who made the company itself. And so we wanted the potential buyer to see, hey, these are the people that are associated and that take pride, quite frankly, in being a part of the company. So look, thanks a lot for listening to this episode. I hope it was helpful. Please feel free to email me at entrepreneurship@dubos.me, and I'll answer any questions that you have. Thanks again, and have an awesome day.
That's a wrap for today's episode of The Launch Capsule. With your host and mentor to success, James DuBos. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share.